Welcome everybody and welcome to today's webinar, Rapid Scenarios, How Leading Utilities Are Planning for a Post-Pandemic World. This session is presented by Copperleaf Technologies in partnership with Smart Energy International. My name is Claire Falkvane. I'm the editor of Smart Energy International and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. We have James Burberry, who is the Customer Experience Director for Copperleaf Technologies, and Jan-Patrick Lenossier, Head of Network Strategy for Rheinische Netzgesellschaft. Sorry, Jan-Patrick, I'm sure I completely mangled that. My apologies to all of our German speakers on the call. Now, before I hand over to James, I do have a few housekeeping items that I would like to just mention to you. So, first of all, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session, and it is accessible to you via the link that you've used to connect now. There's also a brochure for you to download via the Handouts tab on the right-hand side of your screen. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to send them through to us using the Ask Staff a Question box, and that is on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be answering as many questions as we can during today's session, but if for some reason we can't get to your question while we're live, we will try and get back to you anyway. Now, lastly, we would like to encourage you to share today's webinar with your social networks. Without any further ado, I'd like to kick off things by welcoming James.
Thank you very much, Claire. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you particularly to Jan for being willing to take part in this webinar with me. I'm looking forward to our discussion later on. What I wanted to start by doing was just acknowledging what a challenging time this is to be a utility. So much is changing so rapidly. And as we at Copperleaf have been speaking with our current clients, we've been hearing about parts of different organisations that have needed to adopt really decades of change in a matter of weeks. And whereas for some businesses, perhaps the speed with which one can do that is not so important, for you as essential service providers, most of you have no choice but to make those things happen as soon as possible, really straight away. And as an end customer, I'm incredibly grateful that you've been able to do this. And I really want to celebrate the contribution that you're all making to ensure that this difficult time is a little bit less difficult for all of us. For me, particularly in North London, I don't know whether we have anybody from Thames Water, from Cadent, from National Grid, or from UK Power Networks, but to all of you, I'm exceptionally grateful that I've had 8 weeks of working from home without any interruption. I'm grateful to my broadband provider too, but I won't tempt fate by mentioning them until the end of this webinar. One thing I've particularly noticed, thinking about what we're doing here in the UK, is our weekly Thursday clap for carers, our pot banging ceremonies to recognise the work that our healthcare workers are doing to support us. And what I think is being less recognised by many people, but is very much recognised by me, is just how much our utility providers are doing to support those healthcare workers, to ensure that the existing medical facilities we have the level of reliability and service that they need, but also to make sure that some of those new medical facilities that have been sprung into place here in the UK have been provided with the services that they want. I remember looking back at the news perhaps in January and February coming out of China, commentary in our newspapers about how impossible it would be for us to put up new hospitals in matters of days and weeks as the Chinese were doing, and then seeing in fact that we've done exactly that Nightingale hospitals have sprung up in the case of the one here in London, turning a conference centre into a hospital in about 9 days. And I know that UK Power Networks and Thames Water, for example, were instrumental in making sure that happened. So as I say, I really want to acknowledge the challenges that you will have and really celebrate the contributions that utilities are making. At Copperleaf, as we've been working with our existing clients and also as we've been talking to our potential clients, we realise that there's a lot happening very quickly, and what we're seeing is that there are different phases for businesses in general and for utilities in particular that they're going through as they try to respond to the pandemic. And what we at Copperleaf have done to help us with our thinking, to help us separate the tactical from the strategic, is built out a 4-stage model. different stages of the way in which utilities are responding to the pandemic and thinking about planning towards an uncertain future, all the while, of course, while making sure that we're still delivering those essential services that we are doing. So what I'd like to do for the first part of this session today is talk a bit with Jan about those 4 planning stages and discuss how they relate to what's happening at Rheinische Netzgesellschaft at RNG. The first of those stages within our 4-stage model is around communication and safety. And this is really about building our initial response. What are the immediate threats? How do we identify and mitigate those, both for our workforce, but also for our customers? What are the most important things that we need to do? What is the most urgent work? And how can we conduct that work safely? We're thinking about things like emergencies, of course, but also customer connections, construction projects that we're already in the middle of and need to continue. How can we identify what those are and make sure we can continue to deliver those? Alongside those, there's also the adaptation to working from home, something that's particularly relevant to many of us, I suspect, on this webinar. Finding ourselves needing to go from working in an office environment to working all the time at home with the associated challenges that brings, whether that be challenges managing limited space, childcare, but also thinking about IT capacity and making sure that we have the necessary supports that we need. Now, for us at Copperleaf in the EMEA region, as a distributed team, we're quite used to working sometimes from home and sometimes on site with our customers. But I know that our colleagues in Vancouver, working in our head office there, have really found a big change to the way they work day to day, with many people who normally work 4 or 5 days a week in an office, going and working from home full time. And of course, there are challenges associated with making sure that our IT capacity is up to supporting it in turn so that we can support you. I think that perhaps for many of our utility clients, there are really challenges about maintaining staffing for crucial services around crew and control room. How do we monitor and manage our fundamental systems while making sure we continue to deliver core services and keeping everybody safe? And so these are the areas we think about when we talk about that first section, that first response to planning initially in our pandemic situation, communication and safety. So I'd like to ask Jan a little bit about that from an RNG perspective. Jan, could you start possibly by reminding us a bit about the timeline of the pandemic in the Cologne region? When did you first start realizing there would need to be a big shift in ways of working?
Thank you, James. Good morning to everybody. We have been very tense since it became clear in February that COVID-19 would really become a transnational issue. We could not believe at the time, though, that the consequences would hit us so hard and in such a way, us as an employer, but also from politics. And we had absolutely no restriction concerning our famous Cologne Carnival, for example. Unbelievable from today's point of view. As a disastrous increase in infections in the surrounding countries in Europe, Italy, Spain, and France became evident, we began to postpone, cancel meetings, larger meetings, workshops, and outside of office activities. And our asset service providers at Rhine Energy, that's our affiliate asset service provider, and the other service providers, began to think and to start pre-pandemic plans and communication about how to arrange it for the next weeks. And then, as the World Health Organization declared the pandemic status in the mid of March, we were really all of a sudden obliged to get all the employees work from home. Those people in non-operational tasks, and to set up virtual communication rules, a framework, a working framework, a leading framework. And what's interesting from an internal perspective, but also from an external perspective regarding communication, especially to our asset owners and service providers.
Thank you. Jan, could you just say a little bit more for the benefit of our audience about the way in which RNG interacts with the asset owners? So RNG is doing, as I understand it, the management and the strategic asset management planning and the operational asset management planning, but then you have, is it 13 asset owners and service providers who are implementing those plans?
Yes, it's 13 asset owners in 25 networks who interact with us to deliver the best to our customers. And yeah, we had two interfaces, one from the strategic asset management to the asset owner, and one from the operational asset managers to the asset service providers. And yeah, there's been a culture of regular physical meetings. So we know each other. There's trust, and we have a long tradition with that. And yeah, with the pandemic hitting us, this has all changed, and especially on the interface to the asset owners, the service providers, they could concentrate relatively autonomously in securing their operational tasks. They had their plans and they had their teams split up and secured their duties, and us in the strategic asset management with our discussions about asset management objectives, strategies, risk mitigations, and funding of network activities. We were faced to have those meetings purely virtually now.
That makes a great deal of sense, and that lines up in to a great degree with what we're seeing from lots of others of our clients. Of course, for some of our clients, the asset management planning and the implementation execution of plans is integrated within one organization, but it is common for us to see a situation where our strategic and operational asset management planning is then interfacing with contractors, asset owners and service providers. And of course, the challenges that those two areas face are different in that initial reactive phase. I think once most of us had started to get through the initial period of transition and reaction, the next phase in our four-stage model is stabilization. And that's, I think, where we at Copperleaf are today, and is probably true of many of our utility clients and other utility businesses as well. So we've perhaps reacted, and we've perhaps managed to respond to those most emergent challenges. And now we're thinking about, how do we do everything else? How do we adapt to a situation that isn't lasting a week or two, but has continued here in London for 8 or 9 weeks already, and seems to continue to do so. So thinking about adapting to our new way of working, and thinking about the way in which we establish and manage to deliver all the other things we need to do beyond those immediate emergent and urgent pieces. I think that one big thing that many utilities are working through is starting to understand the system and financial impacts of our new world. By system impacts, I'm really talking about changes to load, thinking about the way in which, perhaps we have industrial areas where there's a great deal less activity going on, where we're finding that the load demand is much lower. Equally, domestically, we're seeing a very different profile, with lots more people working at home and a greater need for load to domestic areas. But I think as well, there's that question of financial impact, and this affects some of our utilities differently from others, depending on the funding mechanism. But in some cases, we have utility clients who are actually looking to end customers to pay bills directly, and are finding that those customers can't do so. So we need to evaluate the impacts on cash flow of those situations as well. So that's something we're seeing a lot at the moment, is utilities trying to really evaluate what these impacts look like. Another element within the stabilization phase is around project pacing, ability to execute some of those projects that were in our plans for this year, They weren't the ones that were perhaps the most emergent and had to be got on with straight away, but they're still things we'd like to deliver within the year. And we were obviously hoping to have within our existing asset management plans. So there's this analysis phase as well, which is thinking about, well, what of those can we still deliver? How can we deliver those? Will they be, is it impossible to execute these projects? Perhaps it's possible, but they need to be executed in a different way. And perhaps that has an impact on time, on resource, on budget. And allied to that from an asset management perspective is the understanding of asset risk. If we are doing something different from our initial plan for this year, what does that mean for our asset risk? What does that mean for the risk involved in our networks, in our asset base? Are we doing enough? Are we able to do enough to manage that risk? And what's that storing up for us in the future? And finally, in that stabilization, I think is trying to gain an understanding of customer service expectations. What is it that the customer expects from us? How tolerant are they? Are they understanding of the fact that our service may not be at the same level that it's always been? What do customers want from us in the future, and how tolerant will they be of mistakes, of error, of a drop in service level? These are things we're trying to understand at this stage as we're stabilizing the way that we're working now. So again, Jan, I'd like to ask, if I can, thinking about for you the shorter term and the asset management plans that you had in place with your partners this year, how much have those been affected? Have you been forced to delay large numbers of projects, and are there other projects you've been able to bring forward?
Yeah, with the declaration of the pandemic status, as I said, the service providers had focused mainly on their operational tasks, fault clearance, control center, and there were projects that have been delayed. I would say a third of the projects are on hold or delayed. And we are in continuous exchange with our providers in order to prioritize the plans and to guarantee a minimum of projects being executed. Though we've had the time to put forward a series of projects with a more conceptual impact or conceptual value. For example, delivering more IT and automation on our low voltage networks, medium voltage networks. These are projects which can be argued and which can be discussed in another way, and and the executable part is very late. So we hope that we can launch those projects then when the situation gets better.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any view at the moment as to when that might be? It must be very difficult to plan for that. What are you doing to address the challenges of making those plans?
Yeah, it's all of uncertainty. It's we really don't know actually how this situation is going to evolve. We have been struggling from too much and concurrent infrastructure projects. We had mm-hmm. problems with problems executing our projects, and I'm wondering how this factor will either increase or decrease. Mm-hmm. And we'll still have to think about the impact of the political guidelines and rules, and how, let's say, our working teams are allowed to work in the same way as we are used to get them working today.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very relevant. Thank you, Jan, to the next stage, the next phase in our 4-stage model that we wanted to talk about, around what I've called planning for recovery, because I think that the first 2 stages are really around tactical effort. But in this phase, we're starting to think about, well, how do we plan for what comes next? I've used the word recovery here, but I'm not even sure if that's the right word necessarily. I don't think we know exactly where we're heading and whether it really looks like a recovery or whether it looks like a long-term change in the way that we work. How will that impact our ability to work? And as you touched on there, Jan, will we be able to adapt our construction and crew management? Will we need to break projects up differently? Is there a degree to which we won't or will be able to execute certain projects, and that might last quite a long time? I think there's also something around the changing customer and social priorities, trying to understand the way in which those are going to change in the future. I think it's very uncertain at the moment as to the extent to which we expect these things to change. What we've seen right now during the pandemic is definitely a shift from many governments, but from the public, I think, as well, really thinking about our priorities from a public health perspective. But it's hard to know how that will look as we move forward into the next 3 months, 6 months, a year and 2 years, whether those changes in priorities will really persist or whether in fact we'll snap back to something that looks very much as we were before. And I think what that means is that we'll really need to be dynamic in being able to address multiple factors in our planning. So there are the public health factors, economic factors, making sure that we are balancing our customers' needs with the viability of our utilities. But I think it's broader than that as well. One of the things that's frustrated me a bit about some of the political discourse and the public discourse here in the UK is that it's been presented very much as a dichotomy, as an either or. We're either protecting the public and sacrificing economics, or we're prioritizing economics and sacrificing public health. And actually, as we know, it's much more nuanced and complex than that. It's a question of balancing and trading off between multiple factors, not only economics against public health, but also environmental factors, in also the reliability of our network, the way in which we work with our customers and with our own employees. And we really want to be able to balance all of those things and see a true trade-off across multiple factors. Even, I think, within the discussion of public health, and there's some discourse about this in the UK public conversation, but perhaps not as much as there should be. Public health is, in one sense, that immediate question of COVID-19 and of the direct impact that the COVID-19 has, but it's also a question around the health of people who are lonely, the health of people who are living at home on their own with much less contact. There are other health considerations like that that need to be brought into an overall consideration. Vulnerable people who are now on their own. And so we really need that ability to factor in multiple factors in our planning. And again, in terms of that planning for the future, there is this question of customer service expectations. What will that look like in the future? What will our customers expect us to prioritize, but also what will they expect us to deliver? What level of service will they need? And will they be satisfied with levels of service that they've had previously? Will they expect them to increase in some ways or to decrease in others? How will that relate to the demand profiling that we see? And so, yeah, and looking towards this, the new normal, looking towards as we start to recover, what do you think are the major factors that will influence what you can do and what you want to do? What big changes do you see that will affect your asset management planning?
As you said, James, so we're an asset manager. We're used to balancing multiple objectives, and I think what is new is the uncertainty and the largeness of the uncertainty now becoming very evident. And it's not only uncertainty regarding the ability to execute the projects. It's also what is the future state of our network. Do we have the same, or will we have the same energy demand, the same loads, maybe the same regional loads if industries maybe getting down or decreasing? So this will affect our network planning and in fact have consequences for projects, even our major projects. And also the question of funding and financing projects will be one major issue. Question maybe of liquidity, and this will have to be discussed with our asset owners in particular.
I think that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think the question of uncertainty is a really important one. What I'd like to do is I'd like to launch a poll at this point and ask the audience what you think. The question is going to be around uncertainty, and I'm going to be asking, when you think about the factors that affect your organization's future planning, which of those do you see as being the most uncertain? And I've got 4 answers here that I'd suggest. Of course, you may think that none of these is highly uncertain for you, but I'd like to know which you think is the most. Is it about demand profile in industry? Are you uncertain about how fast industry will recover and what this is going to mean for your forecasted demand? Perhaps it's around that domestic demand profile. How quickly will people move back from the home office to the original office, and what will that mean for the profiles of domestic demand? How certain is that? Perhaps your highest level of uncertainty is around your ability to execute projects, really not knowing whether or when project execution will be back to normal. Or perhaps it's around the ability to enable a smart grid. Perhaps you're uncertain as to how fast you can roll out technologies that will let you manage your assets remotely. So I think that poll has been launched. While we're waiting for some responses on that, I wonder, Jan, if you could say a little bit more about the smart grid enablement question. I think we said earlier on that you have some planned projects that you've been bringing forward that really conceptualize monitoring of the grid, the low voltage network.
Yeah, that typically the low voltage network is at least in Germany, a dump network. It's not being monitored properly, and it's not being controlled properly by the control center. And due to a lack of IT infrastructure and due to the vast amount of assets. On the other way, in terms of fault clearance, it's very ambitious part of the network, and very ambitious from parts of the human resources involved. And we are hoping to have a levy there in terms of installing IT automation, monitoring, in order to help reducing human resources, and in terms of, for example, self-healing grids or constructions like those.
And how easy is it to roll those technologies out? Is it clear to you that you can do those kind of things quickly, or are there lots of uncertainties around that ability?
There are some uncertainties because there's no, in Germany at least, there's a lacking political framework regarding communication, and then it's a matter of time and resources to install all those little tiny IT sensors and actuators, and so in an environment in those big cities with large, medium, and low voltage networks.
That makes lots of sense to me. I'm just looking at the poll information that's come in from our responses. Thank you to those of you who responded. And I think our questions A and C are coming up as the most uncertain for the people on this call. So that was the demand profile from an industrial perspective, the concerns about how fast industry will recover and what that will mean for our demand profile. And that's coming in at the same level as the uncertainty around ability to execute. So people really not being very sure of how quickly they'll be able to bring project execution back to normal, or indeed whether that will ever happen. High levels of uncertainty on those two. Yeah, and does that correspond to what you're seeing? Do you think those are the two most uncertain?
I think yes. As I've said, and I would agree. For my favorite is C, still C, because the ability to execute and the question, will it get worse, or will it maybe will it free resources maybe for us in the utility sector?
That makes a lot of sense to me, and I think that is aligned with what a great deal of our customers and also our prospective customers are seeing. So I want to move on to the fourth phase in our 4-phase model about planning pandemic planning. And it's really thinking about what we do, given that we recognize that this high level of uncertainty exists. We realize that we can only plan to some extent to our post-recovery position because we really don't have a very good idea of what that's going to look like. And we certainly have a lot of uncertainty around what that will look like. And so what we need to be able to do is to monitor and evaluate as that situation unfolds and be able to be reactive to it, but also to proactively have plans in place for different outcomes. What we need to be able to do is to move quickly in planning with lots of different what-if scenarios, lots of different uncertainty, so that if there are particular ways in which the situation unfolds, we're not always on the back foot reacting to those. We're actually proactively ready with plans to handle some different outcomes across a spectrum of uncertainty. And along with that becomes the need to be able to course correct, really to be able to refresh our models and our assumptions. So taking in information that we thought we knew, realizing that the world is telling us something different, and refresh our inputs and refine those inputs so that we can change our plans. We want to be able to do that as dynamically as possible so that we can replan on the fly, so that we can react quickly when there are changes. So I think my last question for you, Jan, would be to ask, at the moment at RNG and with your partners, how easy is it for you to replan frequently? Or how would you like to expand your asset management planning capabilities to make that easier in the future?
Yeah, frequent replanning is not easy, as it today collides with the need or with the reliability our service expects from us. As an asset manager or as a strategic asset manager, I would prefer more frequent replanning and more active way than a reactive way to do this. Having two sides, I think we will have to enhance our asset management plans in terms of quality, flexibility, planning more alternatives, variants, and to have, let's say, alternatives ready for execution. On the other side, I think our asset services, they must position themselves to get a more flexible way to deliver their tasks, and meaning a constant replanning of capacities, a constant match with the asset management aims and objectives, and along the ISO 55 cycle, a good communication structure, transparency, and the ability to control the plans throughout the year, and be able to set up different alternatives if needed.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think those words of communication and transparency are really, really important in the ability, particularly in your scenario, as you are you're engaging with these 25 asset service providers and really wanting to be clear with both them and yourselves about what can be done and what level of flexibilities can be built into a plan. I think that's really important. So what I want to talk about a little bit now is as we move through this crisis, the thing that we need to do from a leadership perspective is really to focus on moving beyond that stabilization phase, thinking about that model and thinking about how we want to be leading organizations through this situation. We really want to make sure we put enough time and focus onto building for the future, trying to use an opportunity when change is happening anyway. We are being forced to make change. So let's lead by using that opportunity to implement some of those things that we've always known we needed to do. We've always thought we needed to do, and perhaps we've said now isn't the right time, something we'll try and do in the future. But we've demonstrated, and as we touched on earlier, that actually we can adopt vast change very fast. Let's use this opportunity of change to really embed some future ways of working that are the things we really want to see in our organizations in the future. And what I think that looks like in terms of investment planning leadership is an idea of creating three major concepts: visibility, agility, and transparency. Making sure through our leadership that we are communicating, as Jan said, Of course, making sure that we're secure in the present and delivering our essential services, but really leading by planning for the future. I think there's a lot of parallels between what we need to do in asset management planning and what's happening in public health planning and communication. Really, we should be communicating, stabilizing, and then looking forward and giving a clear roadmap of the way we want to go, the capabilities we want to have in future, and what we want our organization to look like as we come out of this situation. And one of the things I think is really important about that is really taking the opportunity, if you don't already, to embed data-driven decisions. Using the data and models that you have available, using best practices to consume that data and consume those models, get started and continually improve. One of the things that I quite often hear when I talk to prospective clients of Copperleaf is a concern that the data is not ready, a suggestion that we'd love to do this, but we don't have enough data now, we're not confident enough in our data to do so straight away. And I always say, and I think this is more true now than ever, get started with the data you have. You're forced to make decisions based on the data you have now. You have to make them somehow. You may find yourself having to make them very quickly. The sooner you can embed best practices for using that data, getting started, and then continuously improving, the better stead you'll stand yourselves in the long run. And that's what we see from our most successful clients, is their ability to do that, really to pull in their data as they have it, use it for decision making, shine a light on that data, and then work out how to move forward and continue to improve as they move forward. And that means, really importantly, that we can stay ahead of the curve. We can be acting proactively, not reactively, and we can be thinking ahead about some of the things that might be happening in our macroeconomic climate, in the question of our system load, in the question of what our customers expect and what our regulators expect. And we can have our what-if scenarios ready so that at the point in time when we need to react to some of those changes, we have plans in place to do so. And what I think that means is embedding a concrete capability, which we're calling planning agility. Making this more concrete, what we're saying is that as planners, we really need to be able to facilitate the way in which we're planning and the way in which we're agile with our plans. So what I think leading organizations are doing right now is taking this opportunity to build that capability. What does that look like? Well, it looks like 5 things. Firstly, making sure we express our goals in a value framework, having a framework that the team understands and buys into, which explains that combination of our enduring values, who we are as a business and the things we care about, reliability, safety, environmental factors, public health, and making sure that we have a framework for working out how to make decisions based on those factors. Secondly, it means governance, making sure that we have a solid, strong governance that provides trust and transparency in the way in which we're making those decisions. Having a value framework that everybody understands, making sure that people clearly understand the expectations as to how they justify and how they advocate for the projects that are being considered in our plan, so that there's a common understanding of why it is that we're choosing to do what we're doing. And once you have those 2 things in place, we can really start to do this comprehensive what-if analysis that I'm talking about. Because we have so much uncertainty, there really is a need to make plans around many different situations with the confidence that we understand our inputs, that we understand the governance process around them, and that we're making informed and transparent trade-offs about the factors that we as an organization care about. What that means is that we can work towards a paradigm of continuous planning. Because we're using our what-if analysis, we can continually replan. We have changes that we see and we can adapt to those changes, bringing them into our system and building out a framework involving people and processes and data that allow us to do that, to continuously and quickly replan as we see change happening. And the final part of this piece is planning agility. As with almost all agile processes, the key is really to be able to adapt to the data, adapt to the outcomes we want to see, adapt to the value frameworks we want to apply to our decision making, really have a process that allows us to adjust as these things change. So that's what I think we want. That's what I think investment planning leadership means, and that's what I think planning agility means. How do we get to those things? Well, as we've been developing this idea at Copperleaf, we've had quite a number of existing customers and potential future customers who've come for us for help. And what we're seeing thematically is very common across the world. We need to have an overall view of our investment portfolio and the priorities. We need to understand and have an ability to articulate the impact to risk and our objectives from any cuts, any changes, any challenges that might happen around our plan. So we're in a situation where we have a plan based on one expectation of how normal will look. We see that that's changing. We have some budgetary cuts or some resource constraints as a result of that. We want to be able to articulate the impact of those and come up with revised plans and work around those changes. We want to be able to look at those different scenarios and see what trade-offs they imply and what that means for our overall ability to meet our objectives and to provide the level of customer service that we want to provide. So we have many of our customers coming to us for help with this problem, and in response to that, we've been working on a solution that we call rapid scenario planning. What this allows you to do is to, as a utility, take investment data and take a selection of business constraints. Business constraints will be representing the different ways in which we think the new normal will be. And we're allowed rapidly to create a number of what-if scenarios, a range of these scenarios, each with a clear reporting, a clear visibility of the risk exposure that they bring, and also a clear plan for actioning those, allowing us very quickly to build up many of these scenarios so that we have that resilience to the uncertainty in our future. So what does rapid scenario planning look like? Well, we've come up with a 6 to 8 week duration implementation process. We can work with you to deliver. What we can do here is we can collect investment data. We can cleanse and import that in C55. If we wish to, we can additionally collect resource needs. And then we can set scenario constraints, these multiple business constraints that I've referred to, that allow us to frame the problem according to the different outcomes that we might expect to see. We can optimize that, we can optimize those options, and then we can compare and adjust scenarios once we see the different plans, the different risk exposure and the different actionable plans that come out of those scenarios. And then this gives us the ability as well to present those things to stakeholders in a visible and transparent way. I want to say just 3 more things quickly about that, the benefits that the rapid scenario planning opportunity gives you. And there are 3 big benefits, which are those of visibility, agility, and transparency. In terms of visibility, what we're really trying to give is a view into your portfolios, into your plans of work. Whereabouts are your funds going? What are the highest value projects you're considering doing? How does your plan look in a way that can be communicated to stakeholders? We're trying to offer agility. We've talked a lot about this question over the course of this discussion. Really, our ability to thrive in the future is going to be around our ability to be agile, our ability to respond to uncertainty and to react to changes. What C55 and what rapid scenario planning will give you is that ability quickly to create many of those scenarios and compare them and to understand what the outcomes will be, so that if we're in a situation where we find our external factors changing, we can quickly see which is the best plan to move forward with, because we can understand, having previously analysed it, what the need is and what the outcomes will be of different planning. And then finally, there is that question of transparency, which is incredibly important. I've mentioned this a couple of times throughout, but around the governance piece and around the question of value framework, really making sure that we can transparently show everybody in our organisation and our stakeholders, what is the shared understanding of value? What is the shared understanding of the things we're trying to achieve? And how do those different plans as a result, what's the impact of those in terms of risk and in terms of outcomes if we go in one direction or another in response? What we want to be able to do, therefore, is to execute our plans with alignment between all the different groups who are stakeholders in our decisions. I'm going to stop talking about that there, and thank you very much for listening to me so far, and thank you, Jan, for the discussion. I think we're about to take some questions. So I think if we have some questions from the floor, Claire, then we can take some of those.
Thank you, both of you. That was a truly interesting discussion. And James, I think that your comments with regards to the role that the utility and power sector particularly have played during this time were completely on point, and definitely something that has been felt, I think, amongst people within this sector, that they really are, in many ways, the unsung heroes of the situation. What they do is very often unseen, and yet is so vital to us being able to continue in our daily lives. So thank you for that particularly important comment, and thanks. We do indeed have some questions, and I'd like to start with the first one, and that is, and it's one that I think I'm going to pose to both of you, and that is, in retrospect, thinking back to the start of the year, what would you have done differently, or what other capabilities would you require? A little bit of 2020 hindsight required here. James, let's start with you.
Certainly, thank you, Claire. Well, I think from my perspective, looking at Copperleaf and the way that we've been working, I think one of the biggest things that we would have liked to have done differently was to have been talking more to our customers in January and February of this year about this concept of rapid scenario planning. We've always had these capabilities in C55 and in the software that we provide and the services that we provide. But I think what we've done here in this rapid scenario planning concept is really brought those together in a way that can be very quickly brought up to speed for our customers over a 6 to 8 week period. So I think my answer will be, what I'd like to have done is to be talking to many of you in January about this, seeing more clearly what's coming on the horizon for March, being in a position even in the middle of March to be executing some of this analysis and be ready to move even faster. But Jan, what do you think?
Absolutely, and this goes along with the aspect of digital communication and digital discussion. I wish that we had established a good way of digital discussion and discussion culture, so not to be struck by the pandemic restrictions, and on this basis, to be able to set up a good set of alternatives and plans, together with our asset owners and also our asset services, who are responsible for execution.
So leading on from that, what other changes would you make to your process and to your asset management planning in the future that would perhaps help you control that planning and maybe implement some of the stuff that we have learned at the moment? James?
Jan, would you like to take that one first?
Yeah, from the perspective of plans, I would definitely increase efforts to set up good alternatives, to set good plans, to use frameworks, to use software like Copperleaf has shown here, and to be able to react in a more efficient and more quicker way than we're doing now. And then I think this will also enhance our process and our asset management process and communicating in regards of transparency, in regards of control, to be able to execute those plans, and not only to plan those activities, but also to execute them and to monitor them throughout the execution time.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, one of the major things that we've seen a need for, and that I think really ties into what Jan is saying, is the ability to project resource requirements within the plan, to really understand what expected resource need there is in terms of human resources, but also in terms of material resources, and to be able to respond quickly to changes in the availability of those. I think that's one of the biggest things that we've seen is for many of our clients is the challenge of having fewer available resources to implement work than perhaps we had before. Those of our clients who already have resource planning built into C55, who already have configuration and support for understanding the resource needs, I think are in a stronger position at the moment to really make use of that and to react to those changes. And so I think that one thing that we'd like to do with many more of our clients is really to have that understanding of resource needs and that transparency of what resource requirements are going to be for different plans.
I think the rapid shift from from on-site to remote to upscaling has certainly challenged people, but I think that the response has been pretty remarkable all around the world. This does, however, tie in with another question that has come in from the audience, and that is, how do you suggest a utility manages the relationship or expectations of its regulators during or post COVID-19? James, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'll certainly start on this one. Thank you. I think it'll be very interesting to see the way that our regulators here in the United Kingdom react to the situation that we've seen. You know, as I said earlier on this call, I myself have been served extremely well by my utility providers. I've been given a very reliable and consistent service here. I don't know whether that's been the case everywhere in Europe, and I know there will be cases where perhaps the regulator will feel a need to address certain issues more firmly. One of the things that we've always found our C55 users able to do is to share plans that they've produced in C55 with the regulator and give a very clear picture of what an additional focus in one area or another will mean to the different areas of their plan. They've really been able to say, this is the plan that we've been considering previously. This is the plan we believe is the best from our asset management perspective and gives us the best value according to our value framework. But if you as a regulator are asking us now to focus more on this area, if you're asking us to really push down hard on an outcome or an output in one area or another, then this will be the impact on our overall plan, because it will squeeze us from using resources and spending money in other areas. And so I think that's really important, to have that transparency that rapid scenario planning and C55 give you, to be able to respond to requests from a regulator by showing them in the broader sense, the big picture of what that particular focus means. I think we'll see that being very important to people as the regulators look at how different utility providers have performed through this crisis, and maybe they'll find their areas they want to focus on. It may well be that their reaction is to attempt to sort of in very granular fashion to constrain certain things and to ask for plans that really focus on very certain areas, and it will be important to be able to articulate the knock-on effect that has on the rest of the plan. Yeah, and I don't know how you see it in Germany. Do you feel that the regulatory pressure will increase in Cologne as a result of anything that's happened in COVID-19?
At the moment, I don't think so, because yeah, the regulator is focusing on reliability issues, and networks are still robust in Cologne, and I think in Germany and in Europe. But I think, yes, it's good to have a plan, and good to have a plan ready. Yeah, in order to be able to discuss if the regulator tends to start a discussion with a more granular focus. Yeah,
that makes sense. Claire, I think we probably have time for one more.
I was just going to say I'm going to sneak in one more question here before we have to end, and I'm going to actually ask this one. I know that there have been a couple of other questions that have come in, and forgive me for us not having enough time to address them all, but this one I did think was important. So in the case of utilities facing falling liquidity with an ambitious investment portfolio, how do you suggest they deal with the prioritization of tasks and investments, and especially where smart grids investments compete with traditional core grid investments?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is really where this concept of the value framework becomes incredibly important. What we're doing with the value framework, if we're setting that up well, is we're drawing into our value framework a common understanding of how our strategic objectives as an organization can be mapped to the individual projects we're considering doing and the ways in which those deliver us value, the value that we get from doing that work. And so if we have a robust value framework that's bought into by our team, by our stakeholders, then we can articulate the relative value of a smart grid investment against a traditional grid investment. Indeed, we can articulate the value of investments in human resources against investments in assets, and we can articulate specifically why it is that we see a higher cost benefit, a higher beneficial return from doing one investment over another. So the key really is this concept of a value framework. We want to build that up by understanding, as a business, what are our strategic objectives? What are the things we're trying to achieve? And then how do they map into what we at Copperleaf call value measures that explain for an individual project or for a group of projects, how do they deliver on that value? What value do they give us, and what value do they give us over time? I think one of the things that's very important when you're considering weighing up these kind of investments is a real recognition of the value over time, because some of these will deliver shorter term value, but perhaps in the longer term, they don't offer the greatest sustainability for the grid, and they don't offer the greatest reliability and robustness going forward. So it's crucial that that value framework understands that value is not something that happens in a single year, but it's value that you recover from an investment over the course of many years because of the changes that it's made that allow you to meet your strategic objectives more effectively. Jan, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, it's perfect, and I want to underline that the human resources aspect is it's an objective that comes more and more important, becomes more and more important, and from to have that handled and to have that discussed properly could lead to surprising results. So you should be open to discuss the entire framework and not just traditionally funding against reliability, for example. That's how we used to discuss this as technical as engineers also. Yeah.
Yes, and I think we've very often seen that we have customers for whom we do analyze the value of investments, but we analyze them to some extent in silos, or that's the way our customers have previously been working, thinking about pre-allocating amounts of capital to different areas, and then only within those areas trying to optimize, trying to prioritize to use that capital. And actually what we advocate as the best practice is to have that capital held at the top of our plan, that can be distributed across the whole of the work we're considering. So we really are trying to weigh up, for example, smart grid against traditional grid investments.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid that we have reached the end of our time. I have thoroughly enjoyed this discussion, as I can see our audience has from the number of questions that we still have outstanding. So on behalf of Smart Energy and Copperleaf Technologies, we would like to thank you for being with us today. I would like to remind you as well that this recording will be available on the Smart Energy International website. So from us at Smart Energy International, from Copperleaf Technologies, please stay safe and keep well. Thank you for joining us.